the sedan that scared the police. In the early 1990s, a car emerged from the shadows of British engineering to challenge not only common sense but also authority. Its name was discreet, Lotus Omega, a four-door sedan, silent at first glance, but hiding under its hood a power capable of humiliating Ferraris and leaving the police powerless. It wasn't just a car, it was a walking menace. While the world saw Italian sports cars as symbols of speed and luxury, Europe was witnessing the birth of an urban predator in disguise. Developed by Lotus, modified on the basis of General Motors' Opel Omega, this car was the answer to a question no one dared ask. What if an executive sedan could run like a super sports car, but with room for four and a trunk full of secrets? Behind the project were restless minds. Opel offered the Omega as a base. GM funded the development, but it was Lotus who dared to make it a beast. In Hethel, England, the engineers pushed the limits of logic. The original engine was replaced by a 3.6-liter biturbo, inline six-cylinder, generating 377 horsepower, figures that still command respect today. In 1990, that was pure insanity. The transmission? A six-speed manual, borrowed from the Corvette ZR1. The top speed? 283 kilometers per hour, 176 miles per hour. This in an executive sedan, without airfoils, without attracting attention, and the acceleration from 0 to 100 kilometers per hour? Just 5.2 seconds. It was too fast for its looks, and that was the point. The Lotus Omega was invisible to society's radar until it was too late. The British police soon realized the problem. How to chase something so fast, so discreet, so deadly? Headlines appeared, letters of protest, politicians calling for the sale to be banned. It was a civilian car, but it didn't behave like one. It was a monster on the loose, and worse. Anyone with enough money could put it in their garage. But what exactly prompted a traditional car manufacturer to finance such a radical experiment? And why did Lotus, known for light and agile cars, decide to put its signature on a 377 horsepower monster? The answer lies behind the scenes of an era that flirted with excess. And in the next chapter, I'll take you straight to the engineering laboratory where this icon was born. The origin of the monster. The birth of the Lotus Omega was no accident. It was gestated in silence, in the subsoil of corporate decisions, in the murky margins where logic gives way to desire. General Motors wanted to show the world that Opel could be more than a utilitarian brand. It needed a symbol, something that would not only attract attention, but that would challenge everything that was understood by the term production car. That's when GM looked to Lotus, a British jewel it had acquired years earlier. Known for building light, agile cars with an obsession for cornering performance, Lotus seemed an unlikely choice to create a brutal sedan. But therein lay the genius. The proposal was simple and insane. Transform the Opel Omega, an executive car that went unnoticed on the streets, into a supercar killing machine. At Hethel, the Lotus team received the mission with a twinkle in their eyes. The project was named Type 104 internally, and the engineers began to dissect the Omega like surgeons. The original engine, a 3.06-cylinder, was dropped. In its place was born a new unit based on the same block, but completely modified. Capacity increased to 3.6 liters, 2 Garrett T25 turbochargers applied with surgical precision, a high-performance intercooler, new pistons, forged connecting rods, and reworked cylinder heads. The result? A roar from the depths. But power alone wasn't enough. Lotus knew that creating a fast car was easy. The hard part was making it usable, stable, refined, and yet lethal. The Omega's chassis was reinforced. The suspension received longer arms, anti-roll bars, and recalibrated springs. The brakes, huge ventilated discs capable of holding back the fury of the 377 horses at almost 300 per hour. The 17-inch wheels shod with high-performance tires looked ready for war, and there was another subtle but disturbing detail. The Corvette ZR won 6-speed manual gearbox, an American component in a German car perfected by British engineers. It was a mechanical Frankenstein, a mutant. Every detail was designed to keep the monster under control, but only if the driver was up to it. There were no sophisticated electronics or digital assistants. It was right foot and hands on the wheel. One mistake, and the Omega would spit you off the road as a warning. The bodywork, although it looked ordinary, had also been reworked. The front bumper had larger air intakes. The wheel arches were widened. The rear aerofoil was discreet but functional, and the paintwork was always the same, a dark shade of metallic green, almost black, called imperial green. The look was cold, executive, but the spirit behind it was pure, controlled chaos. The Lotus Omega was ready, but the world wasn't. And what happened when it was launched onto the market? A mixture of hysteria, desire, and fear. Because at that moment, in 1990, the road gained a new predator, and no one, not even the law, could stop him. Rage in the streets. When the Lotus Omega was finally released to the public in 1990, the impact was immediate and uncomfortable. On the streets of England and continental Europe, a seemingly ordinary sedan began to overtake everything that moved. It wasn't noisy. It didn't have fancy airfoils. But it was leaving behind Porsches, Ferraris, even police cars. And it was doing so with the naturalness of someone just out for a loaf of bread. The specialized press went into a frenzy. Magazines like Top Gear and Car Magazine didn't know whether to praise or warn. Tests showed that the Biturbo Omega was faster than the Ferrari Testarossa and the Lamborghini Countach from 0 to 100. A sedan with 4 doors, 5 seats, air conditioning, and a trunk. What was supposed to be a Lotus eccentricity became a real threat to the status quo of the automobile industry. But while enthusiasts cheered, the authorities panicked. In England, the car was sold as the Lotus Carlton. The name Omega was only used in continental Europe. Soon there were reports of gangs using the car for robberies and high-speed escapes. The police, with their modest Vauxhall and Rover, simply couldn't catch up with the Carlton. It was as if crime had gained wings. A well-informed criminal could cross the country before any car could keep up. Newspapers started publishing editorials. Politicians called for a ban. Who needs a car that does 280 an hour? They asked indignantly. The press dubbed it the car that even the police can't stop. The pressure was so great that Lotus itself had to issue public statements defending the project. But the legend was already out there. This aura of illegality only reinforced the myth. The Lotus Omega wasn't just fast, it was dangerous, and that made it even more desirable. A symbol of raw power, technical refinement, and a dash of rebellion. Anyone who drove one didn't want to attract attention. They wanted to escape it. With only 950 units produced, the car became an almost instant collector's item. Each owner knew they were holding not just a rare machine, but a cultural artifact, a symbol of a time when companies still dared, even if it meant angering the government and challenging public morals. Today, many of these cars are stored, restored, or hidden away in private collections. But every now and then, one of them reappears. And when the Biturbo engine roars to life, there's a collective shiver among those who know the story. Because it's not just a car accelerating, it's a ghost from an era when speed didn't ask for permission. The price of freedom. Every excess has its price, and the Lotus Omega, as iconic and brutal as it was no exception. Its performance defied the laws of physics, and also those of social coexistence. It was the right car in the wrong decade. And in a society increasingly concerned with regulations, public safety, and image, Omega would pay dearly for its boldness. Lotus knew it was pushing the boundaries when it created this machine, but perhaps it hadn't foreseen the political and moral storm that would follow. As the car gained notoriety, the protests intensified. British newspapers openly questioned, what happens when a family sedan overtakes a Ferrari in the middle of town? The answer was simple: fear. Public perception began to turn against the car. It went from being a feat of engineering to a symbol of irresponsibility. The Omega was seen as a legalized weapon, and it didn't help that many vehicles ended up in the wrong hands. The model was marked by daring robberies, impossible chases, and stories of ordinary drivers losing control of such power. Under pressure, the British government even considered legislation to limit the speed of cars sold to the public. Although the Omega was never officially banned, its existence accelerated debates about speed control, the responsibility of automakers, and the dangers of making power too accessible. On GM's side, the numbers didn't please. Only 950 units were sold. The project was expensive, the profit margin minimal. For many executives, it was a financial failure. But what they perhaps didn't understand was that the Lotus Omega was never designed to make a profit. It was a statement, a shout, a slap in the face to convention, a reminder that no matter how domesticated the automotive industry became, there was still room for monsters. Even among enthusiasts, the car divided opinion. Some saw it as the pinnacle of mechanical freedom, the last gasp of an era without filters. Others saw it as irresponsibility dressed up as innovation, a bomb on wheels that should never have existed. But it is precisely this duality that made it unforgettable. The Lotus Omega never tried to please. It was created to challenge, and in doing so, it aroused more than admiration. It provoked fear, desire, anger, and fascination. In a single vehicle, all the emotions that a machine could generate were combined, and that was unbearable for a society that only wanted order. The Lotus Omega was more than a car, it was a manifesto. But like any radical manifesto, it had to pay the price for daring to be free. The legacy of the forbidden machine. Decades have passed since the roar of the Lotus Omega echoed through the streets with its promise of controlled chaos. But the impact it made has never dissipated. It has gone down in history as an artifact of another time, an era when freedom could still be measured in horsepower, and fear was not enough to put the brakes on engineering. Today, he is a legend, a specter that haunts the automotive imagination. Few models have managed to achieve the almost mythical status of the Omega, not just because of its performance, although its 377 horsepower still impresses, but because of its aura. The car has become synonymous with boldness, and its scarcity only added to the fascination. With only 950 units produced and many already lost in accidents or damaged by time, each surviving copy has become a relic. Collectors vie for the few models still in original condition. The market value, which was once despised, now exceeds astonishing figures. But more than the money, it's the symbolic weight that attracts them. Having a Lotus Omega in your garage is like keeping an ancient weapon, a reminder of when the world still allowed risk and glory to go hand in hand. Even among the younger generation, who have never heard its engine in action, the name carries weight. Forums, videos, and gatherings of enthusiasts keep the memory alive. Some say that the Omega was the last real car, the last cry of rebellion before the era of electronic controls, imposed limitations and algorithms that decide how much you can accelerate. Today, it is studied with reverence. Its design is seen as a point outside the curve, not just for its power, but for the philosophy behind it. The Lotus Omega represented the idea that a car can be more than a means of transportation. It could be a symbol of nonconformity, of defiance, of silent strength. And even those who criticized it, who tried to bury it with moralistic headlines, know it won, because he's still alive, because he continues to be quoted, because there is something about Omega that touches the primitive side of every enthusiast. That desire to feel control slipping out of your hands, the engine roaring against the rules, and the road opening up like a battlefield. The Lotus Omega didn't die. It just disappeared into the shadows, like any predator on the prowl, waiting. And every time one of them rolls around again, the world remembers. There was a time when an ordinary sedan could make the law tremble, and that time, however brief, was real. The last cry of rebellion. The Lotus Omega was more than a machine. It was a warning, a reminder that, behind every steering wheel, there can be someone who refuses to blindly obey. A car that defied laws, rules, and limits, not just because of its power, but because of the philosophy it carried in the rumble of its engine. Freedom is not negotiable. And when freedom meets cutting-edge engineering, the world is afraid. If you've come this far, it's because you also carry that spark. The same spark that moved the Lotus engineers, the drivers who dared to push the limits, and the passionate people who decades later still keep the flame of this monster on wheels alive. If this content made sense to you, like the video, subscribe to the channel and share it with those who live and breathe the history of legendary cars. Your interaction is the fuel that allows me to keep bringing these epic-making machines to life and challenging the system. The Lotus Omega was the symbol of a time when being dangerous was a way of being authentic. And if you too feel that the world is becoming too cowardly, help keep that indomitable spirit burning. Because here, every car has a soul, and every story deserves to be told. The Lotus Omega was ready, but the world wasn't. And what happened when it was launched onto the market? A mixture of hysteria, desire, and fear. Because at that moment, in 1990, the road gained a new predator, and no one, not even the law, could stop him.